Welcome to today's global conversations, Sinophone Experimental Theater. My name is Daphne Lei, the Director of Illuminations, UCI's Chancellor's Arts and Culture Initiative. Illuminations aims to bring arts and culture to every part of the campus, and in this case, the globe, regardless of your discipline. So Global Conversation is a series I created during the pandemic. My idea was, as long as we could figure out the time zones, we could have meaningful conversations from wherever you are. So today I am very happy to present the topic of Sinophone experimental performance by connecting a few, I would say the most cutting edge Sinophone theater artists around the world. But before I introduce them individually, I want to say a few words about Sinophone and Sinophone theater. So for some of you who might not be familiar with this term, Sinophone is a term that combines the part sino and the part of phone. So basically, it means it's a Sinic/Chinese language based. So in Chinese, the term might be Huawen, which has a long tradition in South and Southeast Asia. And in other words, Sinophone is something that the activities started long time ago. But the term Sinophone was not created, even though the activities were going on. So Sinophone started around like late 20th century. The term Sinophone became broader. So it went beyond the idea of language based. As we know, some of the Sinophone theater is not in Sinophone language, right? It's not in Chinese or any kind of Chinese language. It could be in English and other languages. So in other words, the word Huawen became the word maybe Huawen and Huaren, and maybe Fanhua. That's another term that people might use to describe the idea of Sinophone theater. So therefore, today, Sinophone is a term that aims to go beyond the political and national boundaries and to include the multiple and flexible identities and ideologies. So we can also see that this is a kind of a byproduct of globalization as people travel, as people adapt new identities and change their identities. So in terms of theater, we usually think about the first wave of Sinophone theater started in around 1980s, such as Guo Baokun in Singapore and Danny Yang in Hong Kong, and Stan Lai in Taiwan, and Gao Xingjian in China. But usually we think about him as his later part, that after he left China, to include him as Sinophone writers and artists. So Stan Lai and Danny Yang are still very active today. So maybe you are still a little bit confused, but that's okay, because we're going to have the artists, they will introduce themselves and their work. So you will see it's a very diverse genre, it includes many different kinds of forms. So I will introduce them briefly first, and then each of them will do about 5-minute presentation of some of their very recent works that kind of representative of their style. So that's like another form of introduction. So first of all, I will have Xiaoyi Liu, and who's the artistic director of Emergency Stairs in Singapore. And he's a curator, actor, playwright, and director. And he's committed to breaking artistic boundaries and advocating for intercultural collaboration. He received the Young Artist Award by the National Arts Council, which is Singapore's highest honor for young artists, in 2016. And right now he's actually in Hong Kong because he has been the artist in residence in Hong Kong for since 2021, right? So that's Xiaoyi Liu. And we'll have River Lin. He's a performer, performance artist, and curator from Taiwan. He works across the context of visual art, dance, and queer culture. And his work is seen around the world, such as in Center Pompidou. He is shortlisted artist for the Live Art Prize in 2022. So that's River. And we have Chong Wang. Some of you might have seen him before because he has been to UCI twice already. I think this is the third time. So he's the founder and artistic director of Théâtre de Rêve Expérimental, based in Beijing. And he's internationally known for his multimedia and documentary style of theater. His work has been performed in 20 countries, and right now is actually in Oslo. So he travels a lot. He has won many prizes, and his award-winning productions include Lu Xun and Tea House 2.0. So that's Chong Wang. So now I would like to turn to the panelists so they could introduce themselves with their own work. So why don't we start with Xiaoyi? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Definitely, just now you mentioned a few big names of the generation before us. And actually, I started off as an actor in the company founded by Ko Bao Kun in Singapore. But now I'm mainly doing arts under the name of Emergency Stairs. That's the name of the company in Singapore. People invited by Danny Yong and moving to Hong Kong. I have done a lot of things over the years, but mainly focus on 3 tracks. The first track is the experimentation of theatrical forms, including the 3 fundamental elements of theater: time, space, and body. So I think I should start with showing you a clip. What you're going to see is the first in my trilogy of the so-called post-dramatic theater, offending the audience in 2017. And for this show, for this particular show, for the first 1 hour of the performance, the theater was left empty, no seats, no actors, and all the audience could hear was the actors talking about how to perform the piece and what pure theater should be. And afterwards, the audience was herded to one side of the theater to watch a group of backstage crews come out and spend about 20 minutes pulling the entire audience seat, the bleachers out. So what we're going to see now is the 10 times the speed of this 20 minutes. Okay, let me see how to share this. Okay. And so that's the first track. And the second track I do is the so-called cross-culture theater, which focuses on bringing together artists from different backgrounds, mainly traditional artists from all over Asia, for body research, for creation and discussion of cultural environments. And here I would like to share another small clip with you. So what you have just seen is a clip from a piece I did about 5 years ago called Journey to Nowhere, which was about white paper. Before we knew what is the vocabulary would become today in China. And at that time, the Singapore government had just released a white paper on Singapore's cultural policy. So I wanted to use it as a starting point to discuss how cultural policies influence our creativity. And you can see I put white A4 size paper on stage. Then I invited a group of artists from different Asian countries, mainly traditional artists, to gather in Singapore. And what you just saw in the video is a Chinese dancer, and later on a Cambodian traditional dancer and a Malay traditional dancer. And the artists who did not appear in the clip just now include a Japanese no artist, an Indonesian artist, and two musicians from Singapore. I invited these artists to Singapore to do a couple of things. First, I divided them into groups of two, and each took turn being the teacher and holding a physical workshop for the other. Second, I did one-on-one interviews with all of them, asking them about their challenges and problems in their cultural environments of the cities they are coming from. I ended up developing these two parts into a performance using the three strategies from the cultural policy released by the Singapore government as the structure of the script, and then the white paper as a basic element. And recently, actually last year, what happened in China has kept me thinking about when and where I could restage this work. But more importantly, this case study shows how, some of my thinking and my experiment of Asian culture and performing arts, and the crossing over I have been doing in the last 10 years, which come from my concern for Asian culture. So this is the second thing I do across culture. The third track is I have been working on artist training and development platforms from the early days of doing actor training, then platforms for transforming actors into creators, and then more recently a platform for developing cultural leaders. So those are three main things that I've been doing: the experiment of theater forms, cross-cultural exchange and creation, and talent development. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, all right, River.
Hi. Sorry, now it's like 1 a.m.-ish here in Paris. I might sound a little bit like not really. Thank you for having me here, everybody. And I gonna do screen sharing. My work, interestingly, has been not really, although it's straddling the context of visual art and performing arts, but my work is basically not being understood or seen as a theater work or theatrical practices. So I basically do a live art and performance in gallery settings in most of the cases. And I wouldn't describe myself as a choreographer, but I do apply or I use choreography, or let's say expanded choreography in a visual as a visual art term, to construct situation mostly in an exhibition setting or a scene, the performance or artist's body as a site of exhibition, to confront whether issues or the life situation in a collective or collaborative dialogues with the surrounding, with audience members, or socially turning viewers in gallery settings into participants. So several of my choreography work has been dealing with the idea of queerness, or let's say queering is a method for me to, on one hand, transform one's body, on the other hand, to transform certain binary structure of spectatorship or binary structure of social construction of certain things. For example, I have a series of work called My Body is Something Something. So far I have developed My Body is a queer history museum. My Body is a queer library that was conducted in a real library. And My Body is a queer academy that was a workshop-based participatory performance in Helsinki University of Arts last year. And I do have also another concern of revisiting history of art or dance. That means, for example, I have this work, 20 Minutes for the 20th Century, but Asian. This work takes a title of 20 Minutes of 20th Century that was originally solo work by German-British visual or dance artist Tino Segal that he made in 1999 in Stockholm Modern Art Museum, where he performed a collection or a selection of several excerpts of 20 choreographies work in the last century in order to deliver his historical research about the dance history of the 20th century. And however, this work, but Asian, is not copied and passed a version of the Asian edition or iteration. Instead, it is looking at the development or the trajectory of the dance history in the Pan-Asian context, like geographically speaking, covering not only Taiwan or Vietnam, Indonesia, Japan, but also looking at the Pacific, which includes New Zealand and Australia. And the strategy has been not really selecting 20 Asian choreographers' work to reenact. It is pretty much looking at the colonial history of how dancers' bodies have been formed during the last century, and what kind of method or pattern have been transmitted into this region and to be the embodiment of one's dance movement. And another concern is perhaps, let's say, I'm gonna spend a few minutes to share the video of My Body is a Queer History Museum that actually made last year in Paris in the Contemporary Art Center of Galerie Lafayette Anticipation, for you to have a view of what.
Ici, on descend, on va jouer un petit peu, d'accord? Et puis on va monter, et ça c'est comme chez vous, hein, faites comme vous voulez, hein. Il n'y a pas le criteria, d'accord? On va monter, et on descend. Et monter, ça c'est fait la roue, et on descend. Voilà, ensuite.
You know what it is, it's only two of us. We rock, we make you groove to us. We hey, with the crew and plus. We is when you vibe with us. You know, matter of fact, you've heard of us.
This work sees the artist's body as a site of museum space that preserve and collects one history and the bodily archive. And in this way, the Queer History Museum here refers to how to transform an existing museum into a queer one, and at the same time, how a performer or a dancer's body is a queer history museum themselves, that being visited, being on display, being participated in this interactive or multi-directional situation of performance. And so in this work, which is basically a gallery takeover piece that on the different levels of the Galerie Lafayette Anticipation, we stage different types of situation that you have seen that we do have like DIY fashion show, and then on the reception desk, information desk of gallery, that we also take over that space into a dragging process that next to a real staff member to welcome visitors. And each dancer has a solo museum moment that they engage with audiences, with workshop, with storytelling, with dance performances, with or participatory activities in this way, that to show why they consider their body is a queer entity, and how the idea of queerness and otherness have been featured in their own personal history. Let's say in this way, it's also an autobiographic approach of constructing or deconstructing one's body of museum, or one's museum of the body. And so we have in this work featured 5 performers from California, from Taiwan, from Kenya, Brazil, and Austria. And so all of them are based in Paris, but not French. So in this way, the idea of being repositioned as the other has become revolving around the performative strategy of engaging with audience members to transform the entire space that within existing exhibition that challenging or inviting people to experience another type of live museum or live exhibition that conducted with this live actions and choreographic situation. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you. All right. Chong?
Hello everyone. I am Wang Chong. I'm a theater director from China. I used to say I'm a theater director based in China, but that's not the case anymore. I became an international digital nomad since last year, but since we work in theater, we cannot be, entirely digital. We have to be physical. We have to be on site. So that statement isn't entirely true. But basically, I'm just wandering, traveling internationally, and working internationally since last year. So I guess I'm a very special case in this phenomenon, Sinophone theater. So when we talk about this thing, the first notion came up to my mind was that there are a lot of things that I cannot do in my home country, China mainland. So I always, was looking for opportunities to do those things, especially, political and highly physical, controversial things abroad. So, for example, in 2015, the artistic director of the Singapore International Festival of Arts, Ong Kang Sen, commissioned me to do a work about the revolutionary model plays that Madame Mao supervised. So I did the revolutionary model play 2.0. In that piece, I worked with Singaporean performers who speak English and 7 other languages and who are very racially diverse. So we managed to use the Great Cultural Revolution and Madame Mao's relationship to artists as a backdrop, and to examine, other historical things happened in other countries, including, the suppression by the East German Stasi to its own artists and people, including the anarchist status of many people during the anti-Vietnam War demonstrations in the US and so forth. So that work was definitely something that I couldn't do in China, even after we did it in Singapore. We couldn't take it back to China, but that's okay. That's what it is. Just to add on to the political messages said out loud in the play, we also had a rainfall onto the stage, almost from the beginning to the end, for more than 1 hour. So the performers would have to, do their acting and shooting the videos on the stage in the rain. And that rain, of course, is a symbol just to illustrate, the multitude of the great cultural revolution, which is a top-down, which is inevitable from the individual level, and you can do nothing about it. You can only live and create arts under this huge influence from the top. So that's one example. And I'm going to show you a short clip of an online theater that I did at the Hong Kong Arts Festival in 2021. It's called The Plague. The Plague is a British adaptation of Camus.
January 26th.
We have 6 performers working at home from 6 different countries on 5 continents. And this actress, Sydney, her name is Sydney, but she was based in Wuhan, China. And we also had actors working from New York, from Rio, from Beirut, among other places.
And oh yeah.
Sukumlilela mama pet, sukumlilela makhulu silewe wena. Yesinto sithi umntaka Bobby uyalala ulala nezinyanya uselele ulele nezinyanya uyihambile indlela yakhe sikhalele wena usaphila uwe manje sikhalele sithi lala ngoxolo lala ngoxolo lala ngoxolo asekusikelele izinyanya zakho zihambe nawe ke wena baba zihambe nawe zihambe nawe apho uyakhona zikhusele indlela zakho hamba 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 wena qhawe lihle hamba qhawe lihle hamba azekhanyise indlela zakho enkosi.
Okay, so that's The Plague. You know, this performance, of course, was to picture a situation where people from all over the world get together and try to solve this pandemic in front of us and try to, you know, get over. And even, you know, the performance wasn't entirely about, you know, how COVID started in Wuhan and so forth. But, you know, after I talked to several presenters in China mainland, I realized that there's no way that I could do this in the mainland. So I reached out to the Hong Kong Arts Festival and eventually did it there. Just to give you another example, you know, whenever I got a chance outside of mainland, China mainland, I try to grab that opportunity and say something I always wanted to say and didn't have a chance to say. So that's my situation in the, you know, framework of Sinophone theater.
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much. I want to clarify with the audience. And when we started talking about this, it was before the daylight saving time. And then before they all decided to make all these different traveling plans. So I thought our original schedule was more humane than right now. Like you're either super early or super late. But, you know, I'm happy we're here together. Okay, so let's spend a little bit time just like chatting with each other a little bit. So as I said, these are just, everyone has such distinct style and different things they want to say. But somehow here we are grouped together as kind of under this umbrella term, Sinophone theater. or Sinophone performance. So one thing to think about that is, when was the first time you were kind of grouped under this label? How did you feel about that? And also another question I have is like, when you use the term Sinophone, it seems that you are not alone, right? Even though you're performing, I don't mean you have to be performing together or collaborating in one. Sometimes you do, but not always. But it seems that when you are working under this label, you have all these kinds of allyship out there, even though these are the people you don't see and you don't work with. I just want you to kind of reflect on this a little bit, to think about your own positionality as if you're just working in Hong Kong, you're just talking about Hong Kong issues with people, or in Taiwan, and in this kind of sort of more transnational context, as this word Sinophone theater. So yeah, do you think your positionality change, or do you think about the same piece of work differently? Whoever wants to respond to this is fine. Yeah.
Maybe I start first, and to talk a little bit about Singapore. I don't think I have ever been labeled as a Sinophone artist because in Singapore, because we are in a multilingual, multicultural environment. It's more likely that we use the term Chinese theater, as English theater is the mainstream here. Even so, for me, language is not so important, and I rarely label myself as such. I can give you two examples. I can tell you two stories. The first was when I first set up emergency stares, and we were introduced on the Singapore National Arts Council's website as a Chinese experimental theatre group or company. The basis of Singapore's racialized governance model is always Chinese, Malay, Indian, and the so-called CMIO model. But I would never put myself into such a framework and boxes. So I told them that we're actually not a Chinese theater company. And then they took down the term Chinese. So that's the first story. The second thing is that I think it's in about 2016, 6 theater companies in Singapore formed a Chinese Theater Alliance. And at that time, I was on the founding committee at the beginning. But I actually went into it with lots of questions. First of all, I think that there are many different models for artists or for arts companies to form alliance or networks. And when there are almost no purely Chinese language theater groups in Singapore, what is the politics of Chinese theater as a form of alliance? So in the end, I did not become a part of this alliance. I cite these 2 examples to describe a situation. First of all, I think in a multicultural environment, it seems that Chinese identity and Chineseness may become an urgent topic for some. But at the same time, it may also be the other way around, that just because we are in a multicultural environment, we may also become more open, and our identity may become more fluid. So yeah, so that's my response from the Singapore context.
Okay. What about others?
Maybe I can add. Chong, do you want to go ahead?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think comparatively speaking, in Taiwanese contexts, Sinophone theater, not in my understanding, because I also have had a theater background, has been mostly used and understood and discussed in academic field instead of in the instead of I mean, like it's been more used as a term in academic discussion rather than among the practitioners of theater, which means the theater or arts community. And I suddenly realized that in Taiwan, that for example, we have many populations of immigration from Vietnam, from Indonesia. However, we perhaps so far not yet developed so-called, let's say, Muslim theater or Muslim performance. But we do have, for example, the transformation include that due to the historical trajectory that Chinese opera or Taiwanese opera, as well as in terms of ethnicity, Hakka theater, or the awareness of being Hakka from southern China, historically speaking, literature, or Malay Chinese theater makers. But however, I'm not sure that some of them would be defined as a Malaysian Chinese theater or performance. That, for example, even in the cinematic industry that we have Tsai Ming-liang, but I wouldn't also say he will self-define himself as a Malay Chinese Sinophone theater or movie filmmaker. He was making theater pieces back in late 80s or mid 90s in a way in Taipei. And but we do also have some emerging term and awareness of making and seeing indigenous dance, contemporary dance, or actually a few weeks ago in Taiwan, we have just had a so-called indigenous theater, like really spoken theater, that a play that written by indigenous artist and directed by a non-indigenous theater artist. So in terms of this ethnicity of looking at the framework of linguistic or political Sinophone collectivities, I would say it has been quite unclear still so far. However, in Taiwan, there are several academics are really dedicated to their work and research onto this frame and terminology. And myself, since I has not been really considered as a theater maker, more like a performance artist in a visual art context. So when I present my work, there has been always tricky to find any types of national representation. That, for example, I do know that there are a bunch of performance makers or performance artists in visual art contests and performing art contests that cited their work in Europe, for example, and their representation of their body and history and nationality and identities perhaps have been featured, but somehow this is not in my case because I've been working with a broader concept and problematics around identity politics instead of like addressing what Taiwan is or what Taiwan was or what Taiwan will be in my work.
Okay. Yeah, I think the indigenous voice is really interesting to think about how we group them, right? Because Sinophone is the term that was created to avoid the word Chinese, right? And nevertheless, it seems to be in general Han Chinese based, right? And so indigenous voice, then how do you describe that? Right? Is it part of Sinophone or not? Yeah, so I think that raises a very interesting question, and certainly this term is evolving. It's changing and it's quite fluid. Yeah. And Chong?
first came across this term as I heard from this Taiwanese playwriting competition called Sinophone Emerging Playwrights or something. It's actually pretty inclusive. If you are from China mainland, you can still, send your work and apply. And if you are, based in the U.S. and writing a place in English, you can also apply. So it's a really inclusive, notion of Sinophone. Then, there's of course a much less inclusive version of it, which excludes, people from China mainland. This led me think of another term that I came across recently, 简中互联网. There's this thing called the simplified Chinese internet. It implies that this world, largely internet, is not the real internet. You cannot, get global information, true information from it. In the beginning, I thought this is, the simplified Chinese internet. This term is a highly racist term. How can you just define my thoughts by, condemning the language I speak? Later on, for years, I thought about this. I realized that, okay, maybe there's some truth in this term because your language defines how you think, and the language that is used in China mainland is a certain way of addressing things, especially political things, especially the relationship between the individuals and the government and the nation. There are always certain ways to put things. Then I realized, okay, this term has some truth in it. And later, when I saw these comparison of how answers are generated in simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese and English on ChatGPT, I thought, okay, there's certainly some truth behind this term, because while you use ChatGPT, the version that's generated in simplified Chinese tends to speak from the angle of the mass, from the perspective of the government, the society, and less emotional, less individualistic, less free. So that's my thought about Sinophone.
Great, that was so interesting. Just for people who don't know Chinese, I just want to explain this briefly.
Right.
So simplified Chinese is used by the majority, mainly in China and Singapore, right? And in Hong Kong and in Taiwan, they use traditional Chinese. And this is only in writing, right? Speaking, they can share the same language, but it's in writing that's different. Yeah, so I think most people can read both. I'm not sure that's true, but I can probably guess, because you can kind of find the traces if you only know one kind, and then you try to read the other. Maybe not every character, but then you can probably read the other kind. Yeah. So that is really interesting, because thinking about internet, which is a visual culture, right? It's not so much about the sound, but you read more on internet. Yeah, you see, and then you read. Yeah, so that's a very interesting concept. Okay, wow, time goes very quickly. So, I wanna ask something. So so when we think about Sinophone, we often think about festivals and collaborations and all that kind of things. But of course, we had COVID, and then every nation has a different kind of restrictions. What I understand is like Taiwan immediately shut down its borders, right, for quite a long time, right? So it became like a isolated island, and then different countries have different policies. So, but now, so then of course people became creative and do online theater like Chong, right? But then now, COVID is subsides. It seems that we have more freedom to collaborate, to travel, to communicate, connect, and all that. But on the other hand, now we have like heightened political tension and more like intense kind of economic crisis. So I just want to see that how you think about. Do you think there's any kind of new trends or development changes that's happening right now post-COVID, and think about the near future? Do you think the field is healthy or not? And what do you think about the present state and I guess going to a little bit of the future? Yeah, what do you think about that in terms of the whole field, in terms of the situation right now? Political, economic, cultural.
I think the fact that we are using Zoom to communicate with each other is already very interesting. First of all, of course, is the development of technology and the different degrees of collaboration between technology and arts. Including myself, I've been experimenting with the possibilities of AI and theater creation for the past few years. Of course, I also like the idea that technology can be better used in cultural exchange, like what we are doing now, thanks to Zoom and other platforms, so that we are able to do this now, right? And I still believe that cultural exchange is still very important. It allows us to understand, the political tensions and everything in other places. First of all, to understand each other, and then to compare, to do comparison, and to analyze, and then to develop the so-called future together. Before the pandemic, actually, I did a network study, a network research in Southeast Asia countries. I selected 6 cities, and in each city, I identified 2 to 3 arts organizations. Then I visited all of them and discussed with them the current funding structure, for example, the current situation and problems of cultural exchange, and the future plans and challenges. This network research is not just about developing a network, but more importantly, applied research from which I hope to sort out strategies that we can all develop together. I think the field has always been unhealthy. Many governments and funders are focused on usually on short-term outcomes to serve a larger national agenda, and it's easy for artists to be consumed and used in this, to become contractors to provide programs. Therefore, I think it would be helpful to communicate with funders deeply and wisely, including universities, so that they can support education, research, and network development, other than just productions. This may be the direction that cultural workers will have to work on in the future, in my opinion. Yeah.
Other thoughts? Or you can also thinking about the future. is there any kind of urgency there? Do you have any kind of urgent topic you would like to do, or you would like to see the fields or other artists engage or explore?
What I saw is that the gap between the rich and poor became much bigger than before the pandemic. This is certainly true globally and within China. And in the last few months, in the last year, actually, there has been a trend in China of people running out. We call this runology. They develop a whole science of migrating to another country and leave China for good. So with the population also in the decline, I assume that the Chinese audience number is probably going to decline. In my career, I've been seeing booming industry in theater and film. Theater is definitely a Western lifestyle in the city that every youngster wants to be part of. And now with a economy on the fringe and with people running out, I wonder about the future of Chinese theater in general. But of course, with the gap between the rich and poor gets bigger and bigger globally, I don't know what's going to happen to the Broadway and to the state-funded theater all over the world. We see funding cuts internationally. We see people already left the industry during the pandemic. I assume that we need a fundamental rethink about our future as practitioners and as audiences.
Okay. Actually, I just want to tell the audience that if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function and type in your questions, and we will open up to Q&A very soon. Okay, River. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in general, across my experiences and working between Taiwan and France and elsewhere. For example, if speaking about this such like, let's say, a Sinophone contemporary theater performance that around Taiwanese practitioners, I would say it's not a prophecy, but I would say that it's going to, go towards a more inclusive development in terms of addressing voices and bodies that have been unseen, unheard, or marginalized, such as, for example, the awareness or the visibilities of indigenous bodies and voices, as well as, let's say, borderly queer or disabled theater. I guess that's those let's say genres of expressions or ticking the boxes of the theater making or festival making by institutions have been paying much more attention than like 5 or 10 years ago. And I would say in the context of post-pandemic era, there has been, let's see how it goes, but there has been a ecological turn as well. And this turn doesn't, for me, not only mean about like the way of making theater, with eco-friendly tools, like not traveling or something like this, that of course some people do. But I would say perhaps what is more important is to how to embrace or turn our faces to ecological thinking, and that thinking as a method of receive the worldview. That, for example, what does it mean? I mean, thinking about Sinophone, but at the same time, another question, perhaps parallelly or vertically attached, that is, what is South? Like the idea of South being South, perhaps it's not only in the visual art world talking about global South, but at the same time, I would like to propose the notion of global South. That means South has become heterogeneous bodies being considered, and to get to know what's the possibility of shifting our worldview from the North territory that actually being socially and historically constructed by ex-colonizers, that how we can shift this perspective to re-understand and reread the surrounding and where we are. Perhaps it's also another burning issue or umbrella or term that can be worked further.
Great, excellent. Before we move to the audience for Q&A, can you just tell me what your next project is, what you're working on right now?
I'll go first. It's quick. I am currently working on a new project for Mediterranean Museum in Marseille in France. Going to make a museum takeover piece again by performing their collection, and their collection is dedicated to Mediterranean culture, and which is also related to, for me, the interest to South.
Okay.
I'm not currently in Hong Kong conducting a performance workshop called Not a Performance Workshop. So there are 20 young Hong Kong performing artists joining me, and we plan to present a showcase at the end of the workshop called The Death of God. And at the same time, I am also receiving invitations from the mainland China, and we'll be coming to some Chinese cities soon to hold creative workshops. Of course, like what I've been emphasizing, I also hope to use these workshops as a chance to gain a greater and deeper understanding of the cultural environment and the struggles that local artists face in these cities. Yeah.
I just finished 30 performances of my solo show in Boston and Melbourne. I'm going to take the show to the Netherlands and back to Australia later this year, and hopefully I can bring it to the East Coast again next year. And for 24, I might be collaborating with Xiaoyi on a new work that we're going to co-direct.
Oh, and where would it be?
Might be Hong Kong.
Okay. Wow. Okay, I would love to see it. Let me know earlier so
Thanks.
I can plan. Okay, so now let's go to the questions. We have a few questions so far out by Catherine Meeser, and hello, Catherine. So first she said, well, this is such a rich discussion. I would like to extend this across Asia and generations, definitely, which will make it even more complex. Being careful is very important. Right? Yeah, okay, so then there's a question, actually, River actually addressed that a little bit, because she asks, do any of you deal with climate crisis or your relation to the planet, right? So we are talking about this kind of view, how you look at the world. Do you deal with war or militarized cultures? Maybe we can answer the second question. I guess it's very hard not to think about war when you think about 20th century history, right? For everybody, 20th century was full of wars.
Yeah, in exactly 10 years ago, I did a work called The Warfare of Landmine 2.0. The Warfare of Landmine was originally a black and white propaganda film in China from the 50s. It depicts, how the villagers became soldiers and made, landmines to defeat the well-equipped Japanese invaders. It was a no-brainer comedy propaganda film. But in this 2.0 version for the theater, I did a post-dramatic interpretation of not only the film, but also many other collage texts, including Cao Yang's treatise, including the Japanese Emperor's surrender speech, and so forth. It's a highly physical and also multimedia performance. I guess that's my major work about war and no climate change yet.
Or the idea of militarized culture, right? Because I know right now the military tension, is getting higher, right? Not necessarily war, but the whole idea of militarism is there. It's on everyone's mind. Yeah.
Actually, before I have another example here. Before the pandemic, this Japanese artist Shimizu Kanji, who is actually a Noh master, came to Singapore and talked to me, and he said he thought that there was not enough discussion and reflection on World War II, the issue of World War II, and he invited me to direct a show to work with a group of Japanese artists by using Ko Pao Kun's script, the Spirits play, and I counter-proposed. I say, if you want to really talk about the issue of World War II, then it's not enough to just have a group of Japanese artists. Why not, we gather a group of artists from different Asian countries, and especially artists from Nanjing, to really talk about this. So we started this project, the Spirits Play, during the pandemic. Because I think when certain issues we cannot discuss or have a dialogue politically, but maybe we can do it in arts. So that's my entry point for this project. And I think when it comes to topics like this, I pay special attention to translation. And when we talk about translation, it's not just about linguistic translation, it's also about cultural and political translation. And it's also about how we pay attention to mutual understanding and respect.
I think a war in various definitions has never been stopped, has been ongoing, particularly talking about where I'm from and the ongoing tension between the States, China, and Taiwan. But I will also say there does have a generational differences here. That, for example, the generation of Stan Lai or his peers, perhaps, because when they make their theater pieces, in like 80s, 90s, or that has been really a time that China and Taiwan, like conceptually and politically reopen their and physically as well, reopen their frontiers that to exchange. And so that was a very specific moment when some theater makers like responding to that times. But I would also say like there has been a very clear shift that particularly generations born 80s or 80 late 80s and 90s, perhaps they're now the strong interest is to work with and deal with the internal heterogeneity inside the framework or questioning of Taiwan. So yeah, so of course this reality has been still an ongoing backdrop, but in terms of the theater representation in performance making, I would say there has been quite very different focus and directions at this moment, particularly in terms of like contemporary theater in Taiwanese perspective. And there are of course many women theater directors.
Yeah, so there are another questions, are there women directors? Yeah.
I guess yeah, sorry if I can continue to follow this question. I guess my interest is perhaps, of course, there has been a very strong imbalance in this ongoing industrial discussion about the visibility of men is always stronger and they have more opportunity than biological by being biologically women. But I will also say like the way of approaching male or female theater makers or artists, I guess my interest and perspective would be more looking into the gender identities, which is like more in a way of looking at how and what makes the social construction in a sense instead of the biological sex, for example. So in this way that talking about like women directors, there has been also like a woman theater history in Taiwan, like beginning from 90s, that there is a woman festival actually in Taiwan that being ongoingly running as a triennial or something. I really forgot because I was very young. But perhaps there's also a very different feminist, like strongly queer and feminist performance maker and dance makers are making and approaching such terms in this artistic sense and in terms of this industrial development. And I would say this involvement also related to the political shift of Taiwan's politics as well, such as legalizing same-sex marriage of Taiwan has been strongly encouraging queer artists to make their queer voices heard.
Okay. All right. We have another question. But this question is for Chong. So the question is, so Yaoshi says, I think politically engaged directors, choreographers from mainland China can sometimes be stereotyped or be read in ways that are trapped in this oppression resistance binary. I wonder if you've encountered this kind of binarized interpretation and how you pushed back or nuanced this narrow understanding.
Great question. Thank you. The strongest statement from a theater maker is our works, right? Because you spent several months of your life on one thing, and that thing is definitely, part of your thought, part of your body, part of your life, and certainly, more important than political slogans you can do on Twitter, for example. So, I spend a lot of time doing not political works, such as this Chinese version of Nick Payne's Constellations. When I did it, I just thought that the play was great, and it's a great opportunity to, push my approach to multimedia theater to another level. So I did it, and later I had the privilege to present it in the Netherlands and in Under the Radar Festival, New York. And that performance, of course, was not political in any sense. And I was so glad that it was appreciated. It was invited by international festivals and audience alike. I guess that's my biggest reaction to this stereotyping. I not only I promote my political works, but I do treasure, value my apolitical works as well.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, we are at time. So thank you so much. Thank you. And so from different parts of the world, and thank you, the audience. And I think you're also from different parts of the world. And that was a very inspiring conversation. And I hope I will see you again in person very soon. Bye. Have a good evening from California. And bye.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.